Welcome, everyone. I know people are still jumping on and getting situated. I think that we have Tracy joining us to kick off this session with some information from Teach from the Bay. Are you here still, Tracy?
Yes, I'm here.
Did
Hi,
you want to share?
everyone. Do you want to? Oh, thank you.
Hello.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. It's 12:01, and I'm here to welcome you from the Teach for the Bay team. And just a shout out to the core planning team and the steering committee. Tony's been on the steering committee, so shout out to Tony for helping us really take the conference to another level this semester, this year. We're really excited to see you here. We'd love to see you at additional workshops. If there's, you can still register for workshops, and I'll be sending out emails every day with the links to the workshops on the following day. So if I'll put a link in the chat soon so that you can pre-register if you haven't yet. Most of you probably have. You don't have to do it again, but if you haven't received any emails yet, you can go ahead and pre-register. We'd love to see you at the plenary tomorrow about compassion fatigue and how to make sure teaching remains your dream. It promises to be really inspiring, and there's a lot of other great workshops happening. There's another PK to 3 credential workshop also happening tomorrow. So thanks, Tony, and I'm looking forward to your workshop.
Great, thank you so much, Tracy. I do want to start off, for those of you that are here, if you could throw your name and role that you play in education. Maybe you're a student, maybe you're an administrator, maybe you're college faculty. If you could drop that into the chat. And if anybody here is hosting a group session, if you could just give me an approximate number of people that are in your group session. I forgot to ask that before. But we are trying to keep track of how many people. We've got to have a really good turnout this year. So that's really exciting. But again, I want to welcome you to the Teach for the Bay 5. This workshop is on attention, plasticity, and motivation. And I am Tony Ayala. I'd like to begin with our land acknowledgement. So we should take a moment to acknowledge the land on which we are gathered. For thousands of years, this land has been the home of the Patwin people. Today, there are 3 federally recognized Patwin tribes. And I should be clear, I'm calling it from Fairfield, California, currently known as Fairfield, California, in Solano County. 3 federally recognized Patwin tribes: the Quechua-Dihi Band of Wintun Indians of Calusa Indian Community, the Quetzal-Dihi Band of Wintun Indians, and the Yocho-Dihi Wintun Nation. The Patwin people have remained committed to the stewardship of this land over many centuries. It has been cherished and protected as elders have instructed the young through generations. We are honored and grateful to be here today on their traditional lands. And for those of you calling from remote areas of California, I want to welcome you and recognize also the traditional lands you are gathered on. I just want to take a quick moment to introduce myself. Like I said, I'm Tony Ayala. I'm currently full-time faculty at Solano Community College, and I am the Vice President of California Community College Early Childhood Educators in Public Policy, as well as a PEACH steering committee and a steering committee member for Teach for the Bay. But prior to that, in a past life, I was a classroom teacher. I was on the floor with children for almost 20 years. In Contra Costa County, we ran a program for young children. I'm going to be talking about that program a little bit today. I did that, and then I went on to become a mentor teacher and then adjunct faculty. As some of you may know, being a teacher doesn't have a lot of pay, and I also was raising 2 small children and starting a family at that time, and so I began teaching at a community college at Diablo Valley College in the evenings while teaching during the day to help pay the bills. In this picture, you'll see too on the right-hand side, that's my son Anthony. He's recently graduated from UCLA. Next to him is my wife, Brianne. I like to warn my students, my wife also is in the field of early education. So at the end of the day, we come home and sit around the dinner table and talk about education and continue that conversation. And next to her is my daughter, Ryan, who's a senior, and she's going to come up a lot in this presentation. So I thought it'd be appropriate to introduce her here. And when I went to school, I have a master's degree in human development with an emphasis in early childhood education. And so what I've studied is, how does the brain change and develop over time? How do we influence that change? And how does that specifically pertain to the way that we teach young children? And so the goal of this presentation is to look at the neuroscience behind how young children grow and develop, how all humans grow and develop. And then what does that look like in terms of our classroom application? And luckily for us, the Department of Education has released a lot of information about this. They have publications that are based in science. This is 2 examples of them. On the left-hand side here, you'll see a publication that was released in 2016 by the Department of Education called The Integrated Nature of Learning. On the right-hand side, we have the California Preschool Transition Transitional Kindergarten Learning Foundations, which just came out a couple of weeks ago. So this is very current in terms of research and what's going on in the field of early education. These tools also inform what's going on through our K through 12 systems because we have learning foundations that are integrated throughout that system as well. And the reality is that the way that humans learn is the way that humans learn. And while this might look a little different for different segments of our life, there are some foundational information that we need to know. I want to talk a little bit about the learning foundations. The foundations are broken up into different domains of development. We do this a lot within the field of education and the field of development to help facilitate conversation. We talk about a child's physical development as if it was separate from their social development, as if it was separate from their cognitive development. The same is true in the foundations where we're talking about English development at the same time as having a separate conversation about social sciences, or performing arts, but we know that these things are intertwined. And so I just want to give a little example of what that might look like. I think this is a beautiful picture. This is a father with his kindergartner who is just learning how to read. And so I just wanted to open up the floor to you guys. You can either shout out. I'm very casual when I give presentations or when I teach. Those of you that know me know that I go by Mr. Tony a lot, Professor Tony, Professor Ayala, Mr. Tony. My preschoolers often call me Miss Tony, right? Because a lot of their teachers were female. But I just want to pose the question to this group. What domain of development are we looking at here in the picture? I'll stop share for a sec so I can hear some of your voices. Anyone have any ideas? Do I need the picture back? Social and academic. Thank you, Jennifer Ortiz. That's my sister's name. I was just texting her saying, what are you doing in my workshop? Or social emotional? Great, Maria, thank you. Anything else that comes to mind? Social emotional. Language and literacy. Yeah, we're reading a book here. So again, going back to that idea of foundations, what we often do is we separate out the foundational knowledge that children need in order to be successful. But what we know in terms of how children learn and develop is that these things are very integrated into each other. So for instance, if this child was sitting on somebody's lap and was fearful, what would the learning process be like? That's emotional development. Does the child have the emotional regulation to handle this experience? If the child wasn't able to interact with this person in a positive way, that's social development, right? This would be a very different experience. If the child's physical capability didn't give her the core strength to even sit comfortably on dad's lap right here, maybe she's struggling and she's squirming or she's uncomfortable. The experience of this learning might look very different. When we were originally writing the foundations, which came out in 2008 and then again in 2012, the field of education quickly recognized that children learn in an integrated fashion. They don't compartmentalize, is this social learning, is this language and literacy, like we do as adults. We often compartmentalize that so that we could have conversations about those things, but it's critical that educators understand that these things are overlapping with one another. We all want our young children to grow up and develop and be literate. But what are the actual skills that are needed that are wrapped up in that early literacy so that they can achieve that long-term goal for the children? And then we have to really be able to look at a child as an entire being. And that's what the document, The Integrated Nature of Learning, really looks at. The field asked that this be published before the foundations because we wanted people to understand that children learn in an integrated fashion. They learn by doing, by everything around them, the environment, their interactions, what previous knowledge they hold. And so this publication, while it came out as what the Department of Education called a prequel, it's really valuable as well. And so those of you that are getting into teaching or early in your career, I highly recommend. It's like 115 pages and you can get it free of charge on the Department of Education's website. I guess I could have grabbed the link for that, but I just wanted to start with that, understanding that the goal of education in the state of California is to use best practices based in science. And so when I was thinking about what I was going to prepare for today, I just wanted to do that understanding that the goal is that. Often what comes out in classrooms, unfortunately, is far from what is scientifically sound or known as best practice. And what I want for my students and those of you that are going to be teachers or currently teachers is to have a firm understanding of how children learn and develop. so that you can best meet their needs in the classroom. I'll give you a couple of other examples. Today, we're going to talk about three main concepts. The first one is attention, and then brain plasticity, and then motivation. All three of these are tied into how do we actually retain knowledge and understanding, as well as the impact that they hold in terms of the gravity of the impact to our development. So I'm going to start with attention. This is taken from Dr. Alison Gopnik. Dr. Alison Gopnik is currently the head of developmental psychology at UC Berkeley, and she's also an author of many books. Highly recommended reading. She wrote The Philosophical Baby. She wrote The Scientist in the Crib, and most recently she wrote The Carpenter and the Gardener. In that book, she talks about the difference in the metaphor of a carpenter and a gardener when honing their craft. With a carpenter, we have very rigid parameters. If we're going to build a house, things need to be structurally sound. We have blueprints. Things need to be exactly in place and exactly measured so that the foundation is laid and the walls go up and the roof can fit on top just perfectly. She said that working with young children and children throughout their schooling, well, she didn't say schooling, she was talking about parenthood at first. It's more like a gardener. We know what is best for them. We know the nutrition they need, the types of soil that they're respondent to. We know that they need sunshine and care. We know that they need to be watered. We don't know what the end product's exactly going to look like. There's no way that we can envision what our children, as they enter our school systems, are going to pop out at 18 years old and look like little cookie cutter images of themselves. And she wanted educators, well, she wanted parents, I'll go back to that. She wanted parents to understand that parenting is like being a gardener and not like being a carpenter. After publishing her book, she was then challenged in the New York Times by a hero of mine, Dr. Alfie Cohen, who said, well, why aren't you talking about this in the context of education? Why do you only put this on the shoulders of parents? And she took some time to respond. And about a year later, she did respond with her work and said, I really think that Dr. Cohen's correct, that we need to re-envision education as a field of gardeners and not carpenters. And so I commend her for that. She's done wonderful work that we tap into. But what she was saying about attention, going back to why she's being presented here, is that science has showed that children, very young children, have what she calls a lantern of consciousness, that they attend to lots and lots of information all around them at once. They are paying attention to the sound that's happening outside. They're paying attention to the temperature that's going on immediately. They're paying attention to the voices that they're hearing, maybe the color pattern on the wall. They attend to all of this information at once. And this is different than we do as adults. At adults, what we're more like is what she calls a spotlight of consciousness. And we know how the brain works with this. We have a part of our brain called the prefrontal cortex, and the prefrontal cortex primary function is to regulate the executive function in the rest of the brain. And so it's able to say, like, don't worry about your grumbly tummy right now. I know that it's 12 o'clock. It's about lunchtime. It's time to not pay attention to that. And hopefully you can listen into the Zoom conversation. It's able to weed out, yeah, this is a little nervous, but I'm going to get through this. So I want to kind of listen to what's happening at this very moment. But very young children don't do that. They attend to all of this information all at once. And this is important to recognize as we're teaching young children. For instance, does anyone in here remember the favorite book that they ever read in grade school? That's something you could throw in chat for me. That'd be great. I'll throw mine in too. Oh, The Giving Tree. I found a fantastic one. We got one favorite book from my pseudo sister. Oh, people are thinking Tracy's thinking. We've only got one favorite book. None of you remember your favorite book from childhood? This can be anything that stands out. I'd like to use this metaphor. Oh, my side of the mountain, where the sidewalk ends. Yes, Shel Silverstein. That's on my bookshelves right behind me. A Wrinkle in Time. That's fantastic, Tracy. I read a passage of Magdalene Engel's at my wedding because she's one of my favorite authors too. I don't like The Giving Tree, but I love Phantom Tollbooth. Okay. Oh, I'm getting some wonderful responses now. Now, here's the question that often comes up in education. What happened on page 10 of Where the Wild Things Are? Do you know, Sam? What about what happened in chapter 2 of the Phantom Tollbooth? We don't necessarily remember that spotlight of consciousness, right? Particularly over time. That's not what sticks with us, those immediate responses of this is what happened on this page, and this is what happened on chapter 2. But we remember it in its entirety. We remember how it made us feel. We remember some of the characters, what they were like. Maybe not the specifics of it, but a lot of this is due to our lantern of consciousness. When our brain is extremely turned on, we're able to take a lot more information in than when we're just narrowly focused on one thing. And too often in education, what we ask of children is the spotlight, right? And that isn't necessarily the response that we need to get from the children and their experience of it. We can observe children, we can have relationships with children to help understand deeply what their lantern of consciousness is attending to. So that's just kind of the starting point of that conversation with Dr. Gopnik's work. And we're going to relate back to all of this. The next one, this is some Harvard brain research that started around 2016. It is currently continuing on. And what they were doing in this is they had these trifolds. You can see over here on the right-hand side. This looks somewhat like a science fair project, right? It actually was an electronic board. This isn't an actual picture of it. But in the middle here, on the middle of the board, they would pop up questions. There was like 20 questions over a period of like 15 minutes. And they would cover different topics. They would be like art history questions or questions about sports. Here's one for you guys. See if my question pops up. On what album did Taylor Swift record the song Betty? Some of you might know the answer to that question. I certainly know the answer to that question. If we have any Swifties in the crowd. So they would run through all of these questions, then they would interview the person that was standing within the trifold afterwards. And they would say, well, what was most interesting to you? And certain people that were there would say like, oh, I was really interested in reading about Mesopotamia. This other person said, well, I've got a trip to France coming up. So the questions that were about Notre Dame were really interesting to me. And they would relate it back to them. And then they would send them on their way. Simple research project. They came in and did that. They would come back 60 days later. And then they would ask them again, what do you remember from your last visit? And who can take a guess what they remember most about? They were able to remember the questions that were interesting to them, the ones that they related back to their own experience, what was important that was going on in their life. They were able to grasp onto that information. But that's not an aha moment in the field of science. We've known that for a really long time. What children are interested in, what they're focused on, is what they're able to attend to and what they actually retain. But what they were actually studying was what was going on the sides of the trifold. Okay, so during this research, at the same time that they told them to focus on the question, there's going to be a conversation about it later on, they were putting up images on the left hand and the right hand side. And this might be a picture of an animal running in the savannah. On the right is Chichen Itza. That's a monument down in southern Mexico. So what they would ask them at the return after 60 days was not necessarily about the question. They knew which ones were interesting to them, but they would say, well, do you remember the images on the side? And this is where the remarkable telling piece really came in, is that the attendees of the experiment, the people they were experimenting on, were able to retain information of the graphics on the sides of the trifold more readily when they were interested in the question presented right in front of them. And the reason for this is that their brains were turned on. And what we know about the human brain is that it has moments of extreme plasticity where it's really ready to learn, it's excited, it's turned on, and it's lit up. They actually did this with MRIs and were able to show the electricity that was going on in the brain. And so when you're excited about this Taylor Swift song, because we're big fans of folklore and the song Betty, your brain turns on. And then you're able to take in all of the other information about the silly cheetah or the monument in southern Mexico more readily. And so what we know about this is critical to understanding and working with young children. When you're able to use the interest of the child to facilitate curriculum, it's not that it's about learning about dinosaurs that day, but it's about things like literacy when you're reading the book about the dinosaurs. It's about understanding performance arts when you're singing songs about the dinosaurs. It's about understanding that they can come together as a group and produce pieces of art because it's about the dinosaurs. And so all of this foundational knowledge that we want children to learn about is because their brain is turned on and more plastic when they are engaged with the content in front of them. Okay? And so that's the second part I wanted to get. So that's about brain plasticity. And then the last part of here is motivation. I love this book, this picture. This actually is taken out from a textbook. In terms of motivation, anybody in here ever see children play like this? I hope that some of you had. Those of you that have been around 3- and 4-year-old boys for all the years that I was around them, we used to call this punch yourself in the face game, right? And young children seem to be quite drawn to doing this, boys as well as girls, and not all boys and not all girls, but a lot of children do play this sort of rough and tumble play. At the heart of this, I want you to understand that these children are playing. This is self-motivated, self-directed, relatively free from external rules, but the motivation itself is the play. And so the question becomes, well, what are we learning through this sort of play? We're certainly learning about big body movements, where our strength is, what our coordination is. But another critical piece has been shown in the science about impulse control. One of the number one indicators of later success in life is a child's ability to control their impulses. This allows us to have that spotlight of consciousness. This allows us to sit still when the teacher is talking and we need to be able to focus on information. This allows us, when we're upset, to not flip our lids and react emotionally. And so the question becomes, well, what happens if the boy on the right hits the boy on the left too hard, right? The play ends. So quickly other boy begins crying, maybe an adult steps in. And then the question for me that I like to pose to people, so what is the motivation for the learning? The motivation itself is the experience of the play. Okay? Motivation is critical when understanding the ability for children to develop skills and knowledge. They need to understand why it is important. This is not something you can instruct compared to the richness of what it is a child can experience. He wants to learn how to control his impulses because he wants the play to continue on. Similar example that we like to use is the development of language. We know that very young children are capable of picking up multiple languages at once. The reason is they have an intrinsic motivation to learn to communicate. It seems to be built into humans that we want to do it. The motivation is so strong that they're capable of doing it at a much readier rate, much more successful than we are as adults. The motivation to communicate is the driving force behind the accomplishment, right? Okay. Yes, Robbie Martinez. And feel free to jump in anytime. Thank you for raising your hand, but you feel free to speak up. What's up, Robbie?
Since you brought this up, I'm gonna kind of like ask you a very specific question. When you witness play fighting like this, and let's say it's an ongoing thing and it's expected, sort of normal part of growing up in quotes. At what point, from a trauma-informed perspective, do you differentiate that from an intergenerational cycle of violence that's perpetuated through multi-generational trauma or intergenerational trauma?
That's a fantastic question, Robbie, because these things I'm in a 45-minute workshop. I'm obviously oversimplifying a lot of this because that's something that very much is relevant. And I was thinking back at the time that the project I'm about to share, we actually had a child who witnessed the death of her parents in her household. She had an uncle who had come in and it was a huge tragedy. And so things changed within our classroom, right? It's in terms of response to what was currently happening. I think a lot of it is relational. So you have to actually observe and understand through a relational aspect what is experiencing these children. I don't know these three boys. This is simply an image. But if I was the teacher in the classroom, and my body placement would be very intentional about being close about what's going on. And through my relationship, I could gauge what is happening with them and their experience. That takes a lot of knowledge about past experience and what's happening. But I certainly would look for cues like facial expressions here, body language, their seeking of adult proximity. The interaction of this, for me, is trying to signify that this is a play experience and not intergenerational trauma. Intergenerational trauma looks a lot different, and a lot of times that's even in isolation, right? Where you're not seeking out play partners in terms of motivation. Does that help answer some of your questions? I think it's a relational situational thing that the teacher needs to be able to respond to.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. And I would also say that when it comes to an escalation cycle, what is the climactic point and then sort of like the downturn after the climactic point of an escalation cycle look like, to differentiate it from play fighting? Because the climax, and I think in a cycle of violence, would be almost uncontrollable in sort of disassociative of the play aspect to a degree that you would see. And then also coming down from that, there would be a greater degree of grief, sadness, that you might not otherwise describe as quote unquote normal. So, but I do appreciate
Yeah, absolutely. And I think all all of that is in the context of an actual relationships with actual children, right? And so we need to look at the escalation point of comfort level, because a big part of this too is being able to stand up and set your own boundaries. And so while the child on the right might be exhibiting an experience, the child on the left is also having an experience, right? And so being able to set boundaries to stop play before escalation is to the point of diminishing returns, right? And so it takes an adult to be well crafted to allow yet step in, have body placement for people to feel comfort, to push the zone of proximal development within the experience of it. So there's a lot of things, and I apologize if you want to shoot me an email, we can have further our conversation because I'd love to. But I do know that I just have half an hour. That's all I get. But those are fantastic questions, and it speaks to the richness of what it means to be a teacher, right? We have to hold so much knowledge and understanding in order to best do this. But at the same time, the best that we can do is the best that we have in terms of our education experience at that moment to respond. And I want my teachers to be equipped to be able to do things with intentionality and ask those sorts of questions. I think they're critical to the success of the children. But this is, for my example here, what I'm trying to share then is that the motivation guides the integrated learning. And so what I want to do next is kind of unpackage a project to look at those three aspects of attention, brain plasticity, and motivation. So we're going to move on to that next. This became called what was known as the PET project. At the preschool that I worked at for many years, we did engage in project work. I encouraged teachers not to name their projects until they're done, because you don't necessarily know what it's going to be. But we did end up, this became known as the PET project. It wouldn't have necessarily been called that at the beginning, but it was at the end. The project I'm going to share with you is kind of special to me because all of the children in this are actually seniors in high school this year, which is exciting to me. I am still in touch with a lot of these families, but they will all be graduating, which is just crazy to think because I feel like this was a couple weeks ago. Apparently this is 12 years ago. With this too, in the white shirt in the middle, critically important to your guys' focus, that's my daughter, Ryan, who is now a senior over at Solano Community College's early high school program, and then a number of her friends. This took place at Building Blocks Children's Center, like I said, about 12 years ago. So while we're going through this, I just want you to think about those concepts I presented of attention, brain plasticity, and motivation, as well as foundational knowledge. What is it that we want to get out of our children's experience? But this is kind of what it looks like in a classroom. So the project begins. So at the start of this project, teachers recognized a shift in children's play. A large amount of time was being dedicated to pets, and it was showing up in dramatic play and art. This is something that's really, really typical. All of us that have been with children long enough have seen someone pretend to be a kitty cat or a dog. Then the question becomes, well, how did we respond to that? In this case, things were showing up in dramatic play and art, and so the teachers responded. So it is then the responsibility of our staff to use the children's interest to expand upon their experiences. This is done by a number of ways, things like introducing props to the environment, using literature that commands the children's attention, and using language to deepen and embrace the children's play. One of the first things that we did is that we set up a veterinarian's office. I had just recently adopted a dog, and the children were excited about my dog because my dog had 3 legs. When we got him, he had been in an accident and he was a rescue, and they were talking about how he had to have a lot of vet visits. We actually had a vet tech as a mom in our program, and so she helped us set this up. You can see in this example here, Ashley's got on her glasses. She went and saw a 3D movie, popped the lenses out, brought him in and said, well, if you're going to be the secretary, you've got to wear glasses. That was some mental schema she had in the back of her mind. But here's Ashley taking in notes and another person bringing in animals. I do want you to notice the multiple roles that children use in sociodramatic play. This is how they construct an understanding of what's going on around them, right? And they begin to form empathy for others. You can see these three girls. They brought in these charts. They were like a picture of a dog flattened out or a cat flattened out that they did for intake at the vet, and you could circle different parts and write down the words about what's going on. And so they were always, bringing in animals that had broken arms and broken legs. This is another big hit. Apparently a handful of children, it probably was a campaign at the time about protecting our sea life, and they were always bringing in the turtles that had swallowed something. This guy swallowed a golf ball. I'm guessing this is something that they were seeing on TV, but you can see them taking care of the animals. Again, practicing empathetic response, working together in the classroom. These are all 4 and 5-year-olds. Actually, I probably had some matter of 3s as well. We know with 3, 4, and 5-year-olds, and we want to talk about a subject. Typically, children are very egocentric and are ready to talk about themselves. So you ask children about pets, what are they going to talk about? They want to talk about their own experience with those pets. So we provided an experience where children could share stories about their own experience with pets. This is an early literacy activity. They're developing pride and self-worth in their work, right? In this example, Miranda wrote, this is Yoshi. Yoshi lives in Miranda's house. Yoshi likes to eat bones. I think he would like to be Tommy the dog's friend. He's a dog like Snoopy. Miranda. Some children had camera access. Other ones we sent home cameras with so that we could print the pictures there on campus ourselves. Other children chose just to draw pictures. This is Jason's fish. He's only a fish. That's what my Mimi calls him. He swims in Mimi's fishbowl. She has a bowl for him. He's got fish food that me and Callie and my mom and Mimi give him. He's only white. He's a little fish, a little red guy. My Mimi's fish could turn red or pink or purple or orange or yellow. He could turn into lots of different colors. I was really interested in this fish after Jashawn shared the story. I was working with his mom for many years. I taught his older sisters in our classroom as well. I said, so what's going on with this fish you guys got? And she said, we don't have a fish. Which I thought was just a great response. Jashawn wanted to clearly take part in what was going on in the classroom, and this is the way that he did it, right? He engaged, even though they didn't have pets at home. He wanted to take part in what was happening in the classroom. This is Bridget's doggy, Alma Clyde. Alma's my best friend. We play with each other and chase. He chased me chased him. Alma liked to stand and sit. Him eat dog food. Him's a girl like me, Bridget. Another wonderful story. Bridget was developmentally behind when she was 2 years old in terms of her speech. We worked with inclusion specialists in our classroom in partnerships with her mother. By the time she was ready for kindergarten, she had dropped all needs of services and went right into kindergarten ready to participate. But this is an example of how we value children for where they're at developmentally in terms of her language. An adorable story, but it was Bridget's story, right? And she was able to share that with others. And so we would share this work back to the other children. These are the books that we're reading at group time, or the books that are provided by the kids. One of the examples of it. So more questions arise. As the children play Deepen, new questions begin to arise. One of the things that we like to do in our classroom is we make connections with the children to the outer world, whether that's through field trips or bringing in experts into our classroom. We invited a veterinarian tech from the community to come and answer some of the questions the kids had. So by affording children this experience, children gain more than answers to their questions, right? So they're practicing, they've got their questions, we've done dictation, they're on clipboards. The children are all ready to ask, and they ask things like, is it scary for the dog to go to the vet? How many cats do you have at a time? Do the cats and dogs fight at the vet's office, right? They have all these questions for our vet tech. But it's more than just them getting their answers to their questions. It's about them understanding what they find is important is valued within the community. And that connection becomes critically important as children are understanding their motivation to be active learners, to be participants in the community, not just within their classroom, but outside of it as well. Another thing that comes up, oh, she did a great job about talking about intake. They take their temperature and then they get their shots. She likened it back to going to the doctors for your shots when you're a little kid. The vet tech was fantastic working with the kids. But when teachers use children's interests as the curriculum, they don't need to be reminded to focus of attention. Adults or the parents and families in our classrooms are often worried, well, will my children be ready for kindergarten? What does that look like to be ready for kindergarten? They have to be able to sit and attend to the information the teacher's saying. And by using the children's interests as the curriculum, you don't have to say, Emma, pay attention right now. She has to learn to pay attention to get the information that she needs. That, again, is going back to that idea of motivation. What is really driving her focus? And is it intrinsic or extrinsic? We decided we're going to continue this on, and so we did a field trip. We went to the Animal Rescue Foundation in Walnut Creek, California. It's a no-kill shelter that also does educational outreach. They work with K-12 systems. They go into a lot of schools and they talk about homelessness, about taking care of animals, responsible, ownership of animals. When I called them up, they said, well, we don't work with preschoolers. They're not able to do it. And I said, well, let me talk to you about who I am. And we had to have a conversation about my experience and my background to kind of get into there. But by the end of it, they were very welcoming. And we did take a field trip down. When we take field trips, we go in small groups. We don't bring the entire class at once. You can date the experience here by how much gray hair I have. I saw this picture, oh, God, I thought it looked just the same, but I guess it's changed over the decade. These are some of the children we got to take, and that's my work wife. We got together for over 15 years. We're still really close friends, and had hundreds of children go through our program. But something happened when we're on the field trip, right? This allows them to expand their knowledge base. It's, again, not just what's happening within the home, not just what's happening within the classroom, but really making connections to the community. The children were really interested in this idea that being a pet had one meaning for them in their house and their experience. We had fish, we had a hamster, we had turtles in our classroom, but there were animals out there that didn't have homes, that weren't being cared for. And the children were deeply concerned and moved by this. They had to really shift their mental schema about what it meant to be a pet in society. So we go back to our classroom, we return to school, and the children's focus shift from their own pets to pets without homes. And this shift from egocentrism is the beginning of empathy. It is the basis of a socially responsible adult. And so when the children began this project talking about, mine, this is what my experience is. When we got back, and what we do at group time in our classroom is we have conversations. We sit in a circle and we talk about what is important to you, what's going on. This isn't dominated by the teacher in the classroom, but it allows the children to have an active voice. And the children said, there's all these animals out there that don't have anywhere to live, and we need to do something about it. I clearly remember the conversation. They had conversations. One of the things that happened at the field trip is they said, well, one thing we can do is raise money to pay for adoptions. It's one of the barriers for people to adopt into pets. And they have these sponsorships where you could sponsor the adoption of a cat. The kids thought this was a great idea. They said, well, the animals have no homes. We can do to prevent it, what we can do to help others. We needed to raise some money. I remember Katie said, Tony, give them all of your money. I said, well, I'm a preschool teacher. I don't have a whole lot of money just to be giving for these adoptions. But I think that's a wonderful idea. What can we do about this? And so we had to have deep conversations with 4 and 5-year-olds. Well, what does it mean to earn money? And I remember Ashley said, I think it's when you do something that someone else thinks is important and they give you money for it. That's a huge concept to grasp at 5 years old. My son's 20, and I'm still trying to get him to kind of grasp, getting a job and employment and giving back and getting money for it. And so I was really impressed with that conversation. But what we did is we said, well, what types of things do you guys think that you do that's important? And it became clear really quickly that children believed that they were successful artists. They said, what we do is we draw pictures and make things really well. This is an example of Ashley's work. You can see up at the top here, Ashley wrote her name on it. And this is a picture of Diamond. Diamond comes back later in our story a little bit. The words here say, I love you, Diamond. Please take me home, right? So she's written that with the assistants and the teachers sitting there with her, helping her. Again, in terms of literacy development, we're not sitting down with Ashley and saying it's time to learn how to write the word please. She's dying for this knowledge. I know that words hold meaning. I know that they communicate thought. I want people to understand what this is. And so she was actually writing this as a sign that went up in one of the pens at the Animal Rescue Foundation so that people would be encouraged to take Diamond home. So after we decided what we were going to do, we decided to get to work right away around the school. We had a big art studio at the time, but this began inside and outside. Students created with things like watercolors and tempera. I like this picture because these 2 boys are 2 of my rough and tumble guys. They would ride bicycles around the playground and wrestle in the sandbox. But when it came time to raising money for these animals, they put all that stuff away and they spent every day in the art room. So we need to make some stuff that's important that people will like. So this is a good example. The boy on the left there is actually, well, no, the other way around. So the picture's backwards for me right now, but both of them are right-handed, right? And so they're kind of navigating that. That always stood out to me here. They took a lot of work to work with their watercolors there. This is my best friend's daughter, who's also one of my daughter's best friends. Working with some tempera. We also sculpted a lot. We did a lot of things in Play-Doh and clay. There's the Harvard again, Harvard research happening out in the open. My daughter was painting this with tempera paints. These were just the starts of some of the pieces we were doing. So what we ended up doing is we held a silent auction. And so we invited the families who generally take home these art pieces in for a silent auction. And so they would drop a quarter in a bucket or a dime. to collect money to buy people's artworks. And so they would do things like, oh, Emma, did any of your friends do anything? And they want to look through them, and we'd have them on display. But it wasn't just the families. We know the families don't have a lot of money for this. We invited in the community. I remember we had Bob, who was our checker that worked at Safeway, that where we bought our groceries with the children while we did field trips for cooking projects. He came down to the center. My grandfather bought 2 pieces and paid like $20 for 2 things that he actually hung up in his house while he was still alive. The person that took our school photographs came by, and she wanted to buy a couple pieces from the children. While we're doing all this, we have a chart, right? So the children are doing their early mathematics, and they would collect money, and we'd put it in envelopes, and they would chart off how much they raised. We ended up raising the children ended up raising $170, which was enough to pay the adoption fees for 3 camps. They were really excited about this, and so we're going back and forth to ARF and delivering money to them. On ARF, you can go on their website and see which animals are available. And so we would start our group time every morning with, Tony, get your laptop. And we'd have to open our laptop and look for the animals that we had sponsored. This was Shadow. Our people at ARF talked about how the older cats don't get adopted as readily because they're older. People are looking for kittens. So the children really wanted to give back to one of the older cats. And so this is one of the ones they picked out to pay the adoption fees for. And right away, Shadow was adopted. It was the month of October, and Halloween coming up, he was a sure bet. This is Diamond. You can see what Ashley was trying to draw here if you look at the markings on Diamond's face. A lot of children drew pictures of him, and he was taken home a few weeks later. And then we had Bella, who was a little bit older and was diabetic. We had to have conversations about what diabetic was. Yeah, Tracy?
Are you still, I couldn't see the picture. I don't know if the picture's showing still. I think you stopped sharing.
I can stop sharing when we start. Let's see.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. That's funny. There we go.
So this one was Bella. So this is our 3 cats that we paid the adoptions for. And we had to open our computer every morning. This took a couple months before she was able to go home, but she did. And we had a big party that day. So the children are monitoring their accomplishments of what they had done at the end of that part of it. And so this is one of the things I would share with parents. Just throughout this project, students are exposed to things like early literacy, mathematics, science approaches, artistic expression, the social science of our community. Beyond that, they experienced the process of learning itself, right? Where they had to really challenge themselves in meaningful ways. They learned to value their own intrinsic motivations, to put effort into their work, and to creatively problem solve. By doing this in a supportive environment, they built self-esteem, they formed bonds with others, and began to understand what it meant to be a responsible human being. This is the part that really stands out to me. Like I said, I taught for almost 20 years, and I have dozens and dozens of these projects that I can share. But one of the things that really turned out from this is that this group of children, more than any other class I had, formed deeper bonds together. They became friends with deep, meaningful relationships. They stayed friends longer. Many of them still stay in touch. And I really think it was because of the nature of the exploration of the project. It was about empathetic response and connectedness to others. And through that being what was happening in the classroom, the children really latched onto one another. I mean, they would do simple things like there'd be 5 children lined up because Olivia made it across the monkey bars for the first time. So kids would come and gather around to cheer her on. And that just isn't something you always see. I mean, children are good to each other, but I think because of this project, it really shined. And I would suggest that if our goals for young children go beyond that of just rote memorization, our curriculum needs to reflect what it is we're trying to achieve, right? It needs to be responsive, respectful, and carry with it a faith in children's potential to learn. Okay? And so this is an example of what this looks like, going back to that idea I had of attention, brain plasticity, and motivation. I have talked for a long time, much more than I generally talk when I do any sorts of teaching or workshops. And I am hoping to hear some of your guys' voices. Is there anything that you would like to, any questions that you have back to the project or the topic, or anything that you have in terms of your own insight of connection? Do you see how brain plasticity, motivation, and attention played out in this project? So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing for a minute and turn the floor back over to you guys. Oh, good. There's all types of fun stuff. Oh, no, well, that's a couple things in chat. Any questions for me? Go ahead, Stephanie. And feel free to
I have
raise
a
your hand or chat or just
Oh.
jump in.
I don't have a question. I would like to say I've taught third grade for many years, and I always do like an animal's habitat and let the students choose their animal and to write the book reports. I think it's really student-centered voice, whether it's pre-K, even their high school, it's really important because if someone doesn't care about what they're learning about in their research project, it's not going to come out the best.
Yeah, but I agree. And that's that idea about motivation, right? What are the children really motivated by? What is driving their learning is going to increase their engagement with it. And the science proves that. I mean, it's clear. And even more than just doing, the pet habitat every year, what is currently going on with the children that you have currently this year? Right. And we need to make sure that we're, as much as possible, responsive. There are some topics which are readily available. You know what all children talk about? Their families. And so how do we incorporate family into their curriculum? We do a lot of things in terms of, like, for instance, built into the culture of our program. So things like routines, meals. How do we go about sharing meals with each other? We do things on gardening because we have a garden in the middle of our center. So a lot of those things do reoccur from time to time. But again, always going back to what is motivating the children in your classroom now. I got a couple things in the chat I want to kind of respond to or look at. Those boys doing art are the rough and tumble. Melts my heart. Yeah. And it was interesting too with them. In a side note, there was another child in a picture that I left off of this, but we had a little boy in that group, and he was another one of those kind of rough and tumble guys that moved around. And his mom was a child psychologist. She works for the school district. And she came to me during parent teacher conference and she said, I'm just getting a little worried because my son's not engaging in a lot of art. We know that this is a precursor for early writing. Children that have higher fine motor control are more successful as they get ready for kindergarten and first grade. And she said, and he's just really not doing it yet. And I said, well, how are you valuing the art within your home? And she said, well, we hang things up on the refrigerator every once in a while, but he doesn't really bring home a whole lot, and none of it's very good, were her words. And I went, oh, okay. Well, there's a couple of things I want to talk about there. I said, one of the ideas is really valuing it. What if you put a picture frame up in your living room and let your son be the primary decor in your house? And she kind of giggled. And I went, oh, okay, well, that's just an idea. But then she came to a birthday party at my son's house. And what we did with my children is that we gave them these giant canvases, and then we gave them the color palette of our living room. So these were blues and beiges and things. And we just let our 3 and 5-year-old do all of the art on them. And they came out like children's 3 and 5-year-olds artwork would, right? But that was the backdrop of all of the art in our house. And then my children would, they would spend hours at school drawing and making things and creating things. And so she came to a birthday party at my house and was very much like, oh, this is what you're talking about. This is possibly why your son is motivated to do it and other children are not, right? How do we value the children's work? How do we show them that what they're contributing is valuable? And so that's, just another thing that comes to my mind. How do we actually cause motivation? It's through relationships, right? And so as the children learn what we experience of value to them, they do that. Did you want to jump in, Robbie? Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a quick question. As we see more and more families sort of raise their children in a non-binary sort of household and, rearing and whatnot, when it comes to brain plasticity, education, etc., is there research in terms of, in the field of education regarding like the development of these children in relationship to like other children as it becomes more and more studied or more and more acknowledged?
Are you talking about outcomes for children that are raised in families that are taking
Outcome,
traditional
it could be
gender roles?
it could be pedagogy or it could be outcomes, just whatever in the field is being discussed. Like, do you happen to know in regards to like with some sort of like neuroscience kind of like background or researched best practices that might be developed?
I can't think of any process-oriented research that would look at necessarily the neuroscience, but I think that there is a lot of correlational data in terms of outcomes for children in non-binary households or non-gender conforming households. There is data out there about how those children end up doing in terms of success in programs. I don't have any of that right in front of me, but what we do know is that children that are raised in families that have 2 moms or 2 dads or non-gender conforming parents actually typically have better outcomes. which is really interesting because of all of the navigation that they have to do through all of the bias that exists against possibly their family within the educational system. So even in the face of that bias and monumental overcomings that they have to navigate, they still are doing better. And if we could negate a lot of those barriers, that might point you in some of the direction of some of the questions that you're asking. But nothing's jumping out at me right now. A colleague of mine, Jenny Ferrero, just wrote and published a book that came out last year for early childhood on inclusivity and gender and families. That might be worth looking at. I haven't read it yet. I have it here.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
It's interesting for me to think about what like that it reminds me of sort of this idea of helicopter parenting, and like that there is a certain level of resilience that children need to develop only in relationship to experiences. And it kind of reminds me of the rough and tumble play, like all of that communication in a generally safe environment. It's okay for boundaries to be crossed, because people have to learn how to respect other people's boundaries and set their own boundaries. So as long as teachers are present and paying attention, I feel like we can create safe spaces where actually children are learning some of the most important things, and that we have to learn those over and over. So I just feel like it's important to figure out what those are. And I think that I'm interested in seeing, I haven't looked at the research about LGBT families, which I don't know if that's what you mean by non-binary exactly, but for a couple of years, but a lot of it's just interesting to think about the resilience and how we can both create safe and affirming communities that also have space for discomfort. Like in my classes, I talk with my students about how discomfort is part of learning, and we want a brave space where we can step in to take risks and then have conversations that are hard. Because I don't want to shy away from the conversations about racism or injustice, or the ones that are hard, or even sexual abuse, or anything like that.
Thank you, Tracy, for sharing. Yeah, and I think because at the heart of it, what we need to understand is, well, how does a child actually develop to their full potential? And then look at, well, what roles do different situations actually play in that? And so when you look at LGBTQ households, are they capable of actually building in the roles that are necessary for the child outcomes? And they absolutely are. They are equipped with everything that's necessary in terms of outcome. The only thing would be external barriers in terms of self-identity for the child. What is my family's identity, and how do I feel about being first and foremost a member of that family unit? Are they respected in the other places that I am? I think those are where the concerns arise, because if they're not, then yes, it can be challenging for a child. But if they are, then there's the full capability of those families to do the child rearing. I don't think that there would be any. Oh, I think I'll just leave it at that. And then I saw Stephanie, your hand went up again.
Oh, sorry. I was gonna say, I really agree with families. I had a family whose dads were gay, and then it's really challenging as an educator. It was 8-year-olds, and to talk about like why is it they have two dads and not a mom and a dad. So I kind of defer to the parents in the classroom, because I don't know like how much you want to talk about educate a third grader about the LGBTQ, but it's not my space to say. But I just tell everyone's welcome in the room, and I think that particular student turned out really great. It's really interesting that family had a younger sister in TK who was a different ethnicity. So like they had one Asian and then one Caucasian, and the dad's one was Asian, one's Caucasian. So I don't think it really matters, but how to have a conversation with third graders or whatever age they are without the parents' consent is very challenging as an educator.
I absolutely believe that you need to have parental involvement in those conversations, but I do believe that those conversations need to happen regardless of the age of the child. Children are noticing and identifying and defining things like gender as young as 14 months old, if not, and race is much younger than that. So it's not that the children aren't noticing, incorporating it, and informing their understandings of what the meaning is. And so we have to be willing to have the conversations, even though they're hard conversations, but absolutely making sure that families know we're going to talk about difference. We're going to talk about skin color. We're talking about gender. When I come from a place of privilege, being a male, that I can have some of those conversations in the classroom because I typically was the other Yet I was the privileged, right, other, right? And so I can throw myself under the bus, which allows me some of that. But the children are noticing and they are existing within our school systems, right? And so if we're really valuing all children's development, all children's space, our ability to be in our space, the conversations have to happen. Oh, that's Tracy added to the chat too. It's just the three of us talking. That's okay. And then Tessie was saying they have a class project called Bumble and Honey. They go home with someone every week. Oh yeah, we used to have we had Pancake Bear. Pancake Bear. Everyone thought he liked pancakes, but actually because he was flat as a pancake because he had been around for so long, and he would go home every Friday and come back. And making sure that we're including things. They draw pictures in class, journal, home caring for their class. Pet. Oh, it was a pet that went home. This project. Maybe it was a class pet that would go home. And Tracy's adding some stuff into chat. I remembered, because I didn't remember earlier, there is an evaluation for the workshops that I was going to throw into chat, because I did not.
I'll get it.
Oh, okay.
That's my job.
Oh, okay, that's all right. You're welcome to do that then.
Thank you.
I really was opening up just this last part for conversation. So if we are done with conversation, if you have any questions, you are welcome to reach out. My contact is here and I can throw it into the chat too. I don't mind continuing. Like I said, this is what I have these conversations about. This is the work that I do. I would love to continue conversations if anyone wants to keep going with it. But other than that, I want you guys to enjoy the rest of the conference. Keep registering for other classes, other workshops. I know that we have a couple plenary sessions coming up. But other than that, I am good.
Thanks, Tony. Do you want to stop the recording now?
Thank you so much. It was very interesting. Thank you.